So we've got our yarn laying over our hand, and we're holding it down. Going to wrap once around this crease of our finger, once around this crease of our finger. Walk the back piece of yarn up over the next one, then walk the next piece of yarn up and off the end of your finger. And there is your slip knot. I like to put a border on all of my flat pieces that go up that raw edge that is always on the sides. That way, when you attach it, for one thing, you have all the nice stitches that you can use for your attachment, so it's nice and easy to see. And your seam stitches, if they were going through that raw side edge of the flat piece, would pull on that piece and make it look not as nice. So my tip for today is when you're making flat pieces that need to be sewn onto a stuffed animal like a teddy bear belly or a dragon belly, put a border around the edge in the color of the body that you're going to be attaching it to, so that you have something nice and even to work in, so you have nice stitches that you can seam into, and you can create nicer looking seams on the body and a cleaner line on the color change where the edge of that flat piece goes. Had a great question on Facebook yesterday about what to do when you need to attach a piece, but the end that you've left yourself is too short. My recommendation would not be to add yarn to that. You're going to make a knot here, and that's just going to cause you all kinds of problems. Instead, bind off and weave in that end that's too short and cut yourself a new piece that is long enough to finish your attachment. Go in through a starting stitch and leave yourself a tail, no need to knot it, that's long enough to weave in. Go around your whole attachment just like you normally would, and then make sure that your last stitch, when you get back around, comes out of that same starting point as the first strand. Pull your whole attachment tight, and then take these two strands and knot them together, and when you pull it tight, the knot will pop back down under that stitch, and then you can just weave in these two ends, and you'll have one clean, even attachment without having to use that piece that was too short. Hope that's helpful. Talk to you guys later. Bye. A tube like this that's only 6 stitches around, for example, happens a lot with amigurumi, and they're always a bit of a nightmare, but I have a method to make this a little easier. All I do is press my work flat, and the only thing that you have to watch is not going through these back loops too. But as you're going around, you work a stitch and then turn and press it flat. Work a stitch, turn and press it flat. Work a stitch, and you just keep going around like that, pressing your piece flat each time. Amigurumi need their ends woven in too. You can't just get away with threading your yarn through the whole body and yanking it out the other side and cutting it off. It will come out, I promise you. So you're going to weave in your ends just like you would anything else. I prefer to weave mine in 4 stitches back and forth 3 times. A amigurumi head today, and I thought you guys would want to see how I do it so that you don't have to pin your pieces and find a way to get them to stay there. You can use pins as a guide instead. So you're just gonna find where you want your piece to be. I want him right there, head kind of dipped down. And I'm gonna hold him still with my hand here. And then color coding with the pins so that I know which one's which. I'm going to mark where I want the two pieces to touch. Okay, I'm going to go to the other side here. Let's do green now. Right here and right here. Okay. I'll lay him down, kind of get a different grip on him here. And let's do turquoise, pin, and pin. And then I just need one on the place where his neck's going to connect. And since I do want him to have a nice tip to his neck here, I'm going to put a pin a little farther out than I have it so that he'll dip down even farther. And that is going to touch right there. So you can see those touch together. And when I take them apart, there's your guide. There's your perfect map for your attachment. Here's our chain 5 we started with. And instead of starting the first round here and starting to do all of our increases, we're just going to go ahead and work one stitch in each chain down the end. So we have 4 stitches. Okay. Just like we'd be working back and forth. Now, we're going to turn our work, not rotate, actually turn. And now this four stitches with the chain on the bottom is going to count as the middle of our piece, kind of like the chain did before. So you can see how this oval has no big gap and hole in the middle, and it doesn't have that weird crease that they sometimes get. And I like this method a lot better because it looks a lot cleaner. And you can apply it to any existing pattern also. So if the pattern you're working on calls for you to work around a chain, you can just make a single crochet row and use that as your chain. Increase. In addition to the regular increase, which looks like this, you can do what's called an invisible increase. And an invisible increase is designed to hide that V and make it so the yarn kind of lays on top of itself. Instead of having this big V that you can see, and you can see how the holes between those V's are a little bit bigger, you can see how certain types of yarn that would be very exaggerated and you wouldn't want to be able to see that. So in order to hide that hole or make it less obvious, instead of just working 2 SCs in the next stitch around both loops, we're going to work 1 SC around one loop and 1 SC around the other loop. This will give an illusion that those stitches kind of lay on top of each other rather than being flush next to each other like this. So in order to do that, around the front loop, we're going to work an SC. So, and then this is kind of hard to see on a camera, but here's the back loop. We're going to insert our hook just in the back loop and work our next SC. Now, as we keep going and look back on our invisible increase, it looks a little bit more like they're laying on top of each other rather than right next to one another. So, there's what's called the invisible decrease. And an invisible decrease is just a way to make that a little less obvious. So if we're going to do an invisible decrease over these 2 stitches, instead of inserting our hook through both loops of the next 2 stitches, we're going to insert it through the front loop only of this stitch. And instead of yarning over, we're not going to yarn over here. We are going to kind of do the swoopy motion and go up through the front loop of the next stitch too. So now we have 3 loops on our hook again, but this is actually just the front loops of our next 2 stitches. Now we're going to yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. And we have 2 stitches left on the hook. We're going to yarn over and pull through those 2. So we kind of have the pinch together of our 2 stitches with the Essie sitting on top. Today's tip is all about stitch drift. What is stitch drift? Stitch drift is the tendency for stitches to drift off to the right when working in the round. This doesn't happen when you're working back and forth because the stitches alternate directions, but because you're working in the round, all the stitches face the same way, and they all stagger slightly to the right of the one below them. So you can see here's a stitch, and the next one up is slightly off to the side. They stagger at the rate of half a stitch per row. So that means if you want a perfectly straight line, you're going to need to either do a color change or change your starting stitch every other round. So that's how that works. But this is completely and perfectly normal. I've had people think that they were doing Amigurumi wrong and give up completely because they thought it was wrong, and it's not. Want to add some very cool texture to your amigurumi? Try bobble stitches. Bobble stitches are a great way to add any place you need a lump or a scale or even a nub of a horn. They also make excellent nostrils. So you can put your bobble stitches on the outside of your dragon nose, and this is my favorite way to use them, you can pop them the other way. So your bobble stitches don't have to stick out right side facing out. They can pop back inward the way they came, and you have these perfect little nostrils. And if you've done any of my patterns, you know that I like to make bobble nostrils and then surface stitch around the nostrils to really make them show up. Bobble stitches can be a great way to add just the texture and detail to your pieces that you want. We talked about loop stitches, but did you know that you can cut all of those loops and brush them out? Oh yeah, those loops will cut perfectly well and turn into this fine fuzzy yarn after you brush it. The loops don't come out even after you cut them, which is a great perk and an excellent way to make fur or worry pets for you to play with. So we're threaded our needle, and I threaded it with a bright color so you could see. And we're just going to insert it under both loops, coming from the bottom up through the first stitch that needs to be attached. Then on the other piece, we are also going to come up through the bottom, through both loops, and up. Now, I'm not going to completely tighten this just so that you can see what it looks like, and then we'll tighten it after a few stitches. So your next stitch is going to be back in this one. So we're going to go back and forth, back and forth. Your next stitch is going to do the same thing. In the very next stitch up, you're going to come from the bottom up, under both loops, and pull. And then on the other side, same thing, from the bottom up, under both loops, and pull. Today we're talking about stuffing. I had somebody mention that they tend to overstuff and understuff their pieces, so we're gonna do a little bit here about stuffing. Before you stuff your parts, when you take your blob out of your bag, you'll see that it's real inconsistent. There's like kind of a blob over here. This part in the middle is real thick, and this is all real thin. And what we're gonna do is just take it and kind of knead it like taffy before we ever stuff anything, so that it is in even consistency. We've broken up those big clumps, things like that. The next tip I'm going to give you is always make sure to use a smaller amount of stuffing than you really need. You know, this little piece here that I want to stuff will probably take all of this stuffing, but if I put that all in at once, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So stuff in small quantities. The other thing I'm going to recommend is start stuffing while your finger can still reach the place you need to stuff at the back, okay? Don't wait until you're reaching really far back in here and you pile the stuffing in order to reach that point. Your finger should still go all the way to the back of the piece that you're trying to stuff as you're stuffing it. Then you have control over whether it goes into the corners evenly, whether it's moving the way you want it to, and if it's stuffed evenly. Then once you get your stuffing in there, if you're overstuffing, you're going to be able to see it through the holes, or if your stitches are too big. That's your first hint to overstuffing. Your second hint would be this is rock hard, like a tumor. It is not supposed to be rock hard. It is supposed to feel like a stuffed animal. Now, keep in mind that you are going to want to stuff maybe a little firmer than you're comfortable, or maybe a little firmer than your favorite plushie, just because this stuffing is going to move around a lot. And the last thing I want to say is manipulate from the outside as you go. So wiggle it around, squish it, roll it, move it so that it gets the shape you want and that there aren't any of those hard knots or airy places in the stuffing. So it's all nice and consistent. Hope that was helpful. Have a great one. Have you ever thought about weighing down your amigurumi so that they will sit better or stand up better? Well, this is my method for weighting down amigurumi. These little balls are made out of poly pellets, which is my favorite thing to use, and a nylon. I just buy cheap knee-high nylons at the dollar store. And the reason you do this, the poly pellets, are because if you use a food item like rice or beans, those are going to be something you can't wash. Because if you wash rice or beans, they get nasty and soggy and disgusting, and they just don't work. But poly pellets are plastic. They're made out of the same acrylic stuff that our polyfill is made out of. And so these will wash. These you can put into something and they can be washed as many times as you want. And they're just going to hold their shape and stay the way they are. Putting it in a nylon stocking is because these are tiny little things. See how little bitty they are? And these will sneak right through the spaces in your stitches, no matter how tight your stitches are and no matter how tiny of yarn you use. These guys will sneak through. So when you put them in a bag, you can use a nylon like what I use. This is just kind of the cheapo method. Or you can sew yourself little pouches and put your beans in them. But make sure that you are using something that is washable, especially if you are selling your amigurumi, because nobody wants to buy an amigurumi that they can't wash. So a few days ago, we learned the loop stitch, where you insert your hook, wrap the yarn around your index finger, pull that through, yarn over, and finish your SC. And that creates a loop on the back side of the work. And most of my patterns call for this, and it works on the back side because I just think it's easier to use your index finger. But did you know you can make a front side loop stitch? Oh yeah, you can. This time, instead, we're going to loop before we put our hook through the stitch. So we're going to loop it around your thumb, then wrap your hook behind the working yarn. Okay. Insert your hook so that it grabs that working yarn. Pull through, yarn over, and finish that SC. Now, let's do that again. Go around our thumb, under our working yarn, and into the stitch. Grab our yarn and pull through, and finish your SC. So we're going to pick up our working yarn, and this is super simple. It just, sometimes you have to see it. So all we're going to do is work into that first stitch on the other side, on the other piece, and then work all the way around. So in this case, we'll work 12 stitches around. You're going to want to count on these because that will prevent you from working into the back side of this stitch and making them be too many stitches, or skipping this stitch when you come back around. So let's say you need to bind this off and you want this edge to be nice and smooth and not show that you've been working in continuous rounds this whole time. This is really useful for pieces that need to be actually round so that you don't have this, you know, jutted out kind of seashell looking end on it. And it's really great for pieces that are round, you know, and a little bit bigger this way that you need to attach to something so that you have an exact number of stitches all the way around that are nice and even. So what we're going to do is, let's just pretend that we have just finished this last stitch. And what we're going to do is pull out a bit of a loop and take our hook out, then insert it backwards through the next stitch and put that loop on the stitch and pull it through. So what this effectively does is slip stitch, but it slip stitches the wrong way. Now you can go ahead and slip your end through that hole if you want to. This is what I usually do to make sure it's nice and tight. And close off your slip stitch, and look how much cleaner and nice that is. Want to see something really spiffy? You know when you work in HDCs and you work in the back loop only and you can get that nifty ridge on your work that goes back and forth and looks like these nice little V's? Did you know you can do it in the round too? Oh yeah. So in an HDC, that bar is on the back of the stitch. See, you can see them all right here. There's the third post. Let's put the hook through it so you can see it right there. So working back and forth, you would just work right there into that third post that's in front of everything, and it would leave that nifty ridge. Well, when you're working in the round, you can do exactly the same thing. You just have to come at it from the back of the work instead of the front. And there you have it, a way to add a very nifty ridge to your work in the round. I think this needs to be on a bug. Somebody make a bug pattern with this. The difference between yarn over and yarn under single crochets is pretty obvious. Yarn under has much smaller spaces in between and it makes a sort of X pattern on it. Yarn over has a more traditional look with the V's in the front that we are used to seeing. It also tends to have a flat stitch that is the same width as it is tall, so it is what, a square stitch, whereas the yarn under method tends to have squatter, shorter, wider stitches. They're more rectangular shaped. So as you can see, these actually have the exact same number of stitches in them, but this one turned out more squat, and this one is a little bit more what we're used to seeing. Real quick, let's show off what those look like. A yarn over single crochet is exactly what you think it is. You're going to insert your hook. You're going to yarn over the hook and pull it through. Then yarn over the hook and pull it through again. Just the way we're used to doing it pretty much all the time. Yarn under is exactly how it sounds. You're going to insert your hook, grab the yarn so the yarn is under your hook, and then grab the yarn again from the underside so it is under the hook again. You can see how it makes that little X. And that is the difference between yarn over and yarn under single crochets. Previous round, and I'm going to insert the hook and pull up the loop, and instead of finishing this SC with this color, I'm going to finish it with the white, which is a standard color change. So real basic color change. And then in the very first stitch of my next round, instead of doing an SC here, I'm going to slip stitch this stitch. Make sure that slip stitch is big enough you can work back into it easily when you come back around. Now, when I go all the way around, go back to doing your SCs like you were doing. And as I get all of the previous round, and here is our slip stitch, we're just going to work into that just regular. Like I said, make sure that that was loose enough you can work into it. And as you keep going, you'll see that you don't have that ugly jog, you just have a smaller one. So you don't have the big giant step, you have a little tiny step. Have you ever thought about adding smoke to your amigurumi projects? Fizzle here has smoke coming out of his nose while he is sleeping. How do we do it? It's a super simple technique. I always find this easiest to do on a pair of jeans. Don't ask me why, probably because they're tough and they can handle being brushed. You're going to make a piece of gray yarn that is much longer than you actually need, because you're going to need an end that is not brushed out to sew into your dragon face. And the other end, you're just going to brush. I like to brush pretty quickly and in small increments. Okay, consider rotating it around a bit. And there is your smoke. Now all you have to do is thread this through your dragon nose or whatever else needs smoke and squirt that with just a tiny bit of hairspray to make it stand up nice and straight. And there you have it. Today's tip is a crazy one that nobody seems to ever talk about. Do you ever have color changes and when you're working in the round, they slant because of your stitch drift? If you were to not adjust for stitch drift, they just kind of like cruise along like this and you can never get straight edges. Check out these straight edges. How did I do it? I didn't do it by adjusting for stitch drift. I did it by only working in the front loops of the work. I know, crazy, right? Front loops only creates straight vertical lines on your work. Now, what it also does is add a lot of texture to the work. So you can see how incredibly ridgy it is. So you have to keep that in mind, but it is a way to make perfectly straight lines when you need them. Pretty sweet, huh? So what do you do with your yarn scraps when you're done with them? Well, when I have a piece that is too small to use for my next project, I add it to my ever-growing scrap ball. Every piece is tied together with the magic knot, which we talked about at length in an earlier video. Here's an example of the magic knot. It is not going anywhere, and it holds the whole thing together, every single strand. And what I love to do is just keep this guy around. When it gets really big or when I get a crazy hair, I make something adorable, like this guy. I make a worry pet, like him. Or if I'm really feeling like using up a lot of it, I can make a really big fuzzy sloth. So this is what I do with my magic ball of scraps. What do you do with your scraps? So when your stuffed animals start getting a little dirty and gross, like guinea corn here, how do you wash them? I stuff mine into a knee-high stocking. Look, he looks like an old-fashioned robber. And then tie a knot in it pretty close to the edge here, because the purpose of the knee-high stocking is twofold. The first reason is to keep all of the stuffing from shifting while he is in the wash. This will hold him together and the stuffing won't have a chance to kind of leak out any holes or shift into the wrong place. The second reason is to protect these safety eyes, because these will get bounced against the side of a washing machine and they will get dinged up pretty good. So if you have a knee-high on him, you can protect those eyes. I think with this guy, I'm going to go twofold here, and after I've knotted it, I'm going to put it back over his head again to double protect those safety eyes, since this guy is in a lot of pictures and we need to keep those safety eyes nice and protected. Then we toss him in the washing machine. I put him in the top load because he doesn't deserve to be agitated quite as much. And I also love to throw in a small towel or rag, because that keeps the tub balanced when it's trying to spin around just a stuffed animal. Obviously, the towel is more important with a larger stuffed animal, but guinea corn probably needs a buddy in there with him too. And that's it. You'll just air dry your buddy when he comes out of the washing machine, and then maybe toss him in the dryer for 5 or 10 minutes on super low, still in the stocking so his eyes don't get banged up. Right at the end when you think he's almost dry, just to give him a nice fluff.